The harsh fluorescent lights of the conference room bore down on me, as Director Parker's face grew increasingly red with anger. His words cut through the air like a knife.
You're just an old man near retirement, aren't you? What's with this impossible training regimen you're putting my precious son through? And then lecturing him when he makes mistakes. Are you trying to crush young talent? You act high and mighty like some master craftsman, but you're just a low-level worker. Know your place.
I stood there maintaining my composure despite the verbal assault. Currently, I'm training the director's son, who just joined our company. However, the son has a terrible attitude. When I try to give him constructive feedback, I ended up being reprimanded by the director instead. Taking a deep breath, I decide to stand my ground. Mr. Parker, with all due respect, your son's work ethic is completely unacceptable. He shows up hours late, comes to work after drinking. It's unprecedented. Even with his Ivy League degree, no one will follow someone with such poor work habits. When I said this, the director stood up quickly, his chair scraped against the floor. His face had turned an even deeper shade of red.
Silence! You! How dare you! You incompetent old fool, who can't even teach basic tasks properly. You're fired! Fired!
Next to him, the director's son was smirking, a look of smug satisfaction spreading across his face. I couldn't take it anymore, my hands clenching into fists at my side. Just as I was thinking the situation couldn't get any worse, someone would arrive who would send this father-son duo crashing down. Let me back up a bit and introduce myself. My name is Thomas Anderson. I'm 52 years old now, and I live with my wife and daughter Sarah, who is a mother of 2 wonderful children. We're all getting older, but we're a close-knit family. However, my work makes it difficult to spend time with them. I remember a conversation with Sarah just last week. She was standing in our kitchen, preparing dinner while her children played in the next room. "Dad," she said, stirring a pot of soup, "you should play with your beloved grandkids sometimes. They can see Grandma anytime, but they rarely get to see Grandpa. They're always saying we want to see Grandpa." "Yeah, sorry about that," I replied, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settle on my shoulders. I used to work for a major food manufacturing company, but about 10 years ago, I switched to a company that makes tofu. Though it's a tofu company, it's a major corporation that sells nationwide. Every day, I've been making tofu starting at 1 a.m. My wife often expresses her concern. Just the other night, while we were getting ready for bed, she turned to me with worried eyes. "Honey, how long do you plan to keep making tofu? You're getting older and you have a family. Isn't it time to stop?" However, I take immense pride in making tofu. It's an incredibly complex process that most people don't understand. Soybeans, like people, are different each day. You need to pay attention and adjust your approach based on their condition, just like you would with people. It's a world of daily judgment calls and serious dedication. Though I say this now, when I first transferred here, I was often scolded by my seniors. I remember my first week vividly. My hands were covered in burns from the hot water, and my arms ached from stirring the massive vats of soy milk. My mentor at the time, old Mr. Tanaka, would stand over my shoulder shaking his head. No, Anderson-san," he would say, his weathered hands guiding me. "Feel the texture. The soybeans will tell you what they need if you listen to them." At the time, I thought he was just being poetic, and now I understand exactly what he meant. Other craftsmen take their work just as seriously. I've watched them arrive before dawn, checking the humidity levels, testing the water temperatures, all with the focus of surgeons performing a delicate operation. After 10 years of this dedication, I've grown enough to teach others how to make tofu. Currently, I'm training a new employee, James Parker, son of Richard Parker, the director of Sales Division 1. Richard Parker, the father, joined the company mid-career, and his reputation precedes him. He's known for being extremely strict about numbers, and while his sales performance is decent, there are rumors that he uses forceful methods to achieve his targets. I've seen it myself during my visits to headquarters. Just last month, I witnessed him berating a young salesman in the middle of the office.
You call these numbers acceptable?
He had shouted, waving a report in the air.
My grandmother could sell more than this from her retirement home.
While it seems close to harassment, the fact that he's still a director suggests it hasn't been considered serious enough to address. And then there's his son James, who got in through pure nepotism. Though he graduated from Harvard, he apparently failed our company's written exam. Through his father's connections, he was hired after just one interview. The story spread through the company like wildfire, how the young Parker had stumbled through basic questions but still received an offer letter the next day.
My son is a Harvard graduate who studied economics,
the director would boast to everyone at every opportunity, his chest puffing out with pride. I've heard him say it so many times I could recite it in my sleep. While he's harsh with other subordinates, he's extremely lenient with his son. James initially wanted to work at headquarters like his father, but was assigned to our production facility because
It's important to understand the production process.
according to the CEO. And somehow, I became James' trainer. However, James' work attitude is, well, frankly terrible. Perhaps because his father is a director, he seems to think he's important too. During my morning briefings, he'll sit there yawning openly, barely acknowledging the crucial information I'm sharing. His responses are usually just empty acknowledgements. A bored, yeah, or whatever mumbled under his breath. He clearly looks down at production work. Our tofu making begins with checking the condition of the soybeans and preparing them at 1 a.m. The pre-dawn hours are crucial. The temperature, humidity, and timing all have to be perfect. The other craftsmen and I have developed an almost spiritual connection to this time of day. The world is quiet, and we can focus entirely on our craft. So we start the operation at 1 a.m., but James has never once arrived at the designated time. The earliest he's ever shown up is 5 a.m., and even then he acted like he was doing us a favor. If he can't even show up at the designated time, does he have any awareness of being a working professional? One morning, while slouching against the wall and watching the rest of us work, James let out an exaggerated sigh.
All this manual work. So boring,
he drawled, not even trying to hide his disdain.
This shouldn't be done by people. Why don't you automate it? Isn't this just a waste of labor cost?
That's not how it works, I replied, trying to maintain my patience. I was in the middle of demonstrating the delicate process of coagulation, where timing is everything.
Yes, it is,
he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively.
Man, if I were CEO, I'd automate this whole process first thing. Cut labor costs, increase efficiency, sell more. You know, being an economics graduate, I just naturally see all these inefficiencies and get great ideas.
He says this while standing around watching other craftsmen work, not lifting a finger himself. Waving around his theoretical economics knowledge and getting full of himself. Some mornings I catch the other workers exchanging knowing glances, their frustration evident in their tight-lipped smiles and stiff shoulders. Is this how all young people are these days? All theory, no practice? He doesn't understand the meaning of this work at all. One morning, I watched him nearly ruin an entire batch of tofu because he was too busy explaining his latest efficiency theory to actually pay attention to the temperature gauge. While I'm honestly appalled, saying anything would just cause trouble with Director Parker, so I tried various approaches to motivate this modern young man. I remember how my old mentor, Mr. Tanaka, had guided me with patience and wisdom, and tried to channel that same spirit. For example, I attempted forced praise. Wow, James, you came in at 9 a.m. today, a whole hour earlier than usual. That's amazing. Really helps us out. The other workers looked at me like I lost my mind, but I persisted. I tried completely affirming whatever he said.
This is such a pain,
James had complained one morning, scrolling through his phone while leaning against the wall.
Old guys, why do you do this stuff? Don't you want to automate it?
I bit back my initial response and instead tried to engage him in discussion. You know, James, automation is an interesting topic. Why don't you tell me more about your ideas while we check these soybeans? I showed him examples before having him practice. Never got angry no matter what he said or did wrong. I consulted with others and tried various approaches, but I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. James doesn't take notes at all. No matter how carefully I break down and explain the work, he just stares off into space, seemingly not listening at all. One particularly frustrating morning, I spent an hour explaining the intricate process of monitoring soybean consistency. See how the texture changes as they soak? I demonstrated, running my fingers through the water. This is crucial for the final product's quality. James didn't even look up from his phone. He muttered, thumbs tapping away at the screen. I see. He has no intention of learning in the first place. I'm starting to lose motivation to teach him. The other workers have noticed too. I can see it in their faces each morning, the way they tense up when James walks in, bracing themselves for another day of his attitude. Then came the morning that changed everything. James, who usually shows up at 9 or 10 a.m. at the earliest, suddenly appeared at the proper start time of 1 a.m. The other workers and I exchanged surprised glances as he stumbled through the door. I approached him, thinking I should praise him this time, but the moment he got close, I was hit with an overwhelming smell of alcohol. Had he come straight from drinking? This is completely unprofessional. I had to say something, so I questioned him. Getting closer, the alcohol smell was even stronger, mixed with what seemed to be expensive cologne trying to mask it. Ugh, James, what were you doing before coming to work? He swayed slightly, looking at me with glassy eyes.
Huh? None of your business, old man,
he slurred, hiccuping mid-sentence.
Well, since I'm in a good mood, I'll tell you. There's this awesome secret bar nearby, but I better keep the details secret. Don't want it getting too crowded.
Perhaps due to being drunk, he was even more flippant than usual. Not a hint of remorse. Even I was starting to get irritated. My patience wearing dangerously thin. The other workers had stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold with concerned expressions. "Why did you come after drinking?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. James leaned against the wall, grinning lazily.
Well, I was feeling good, you know. Thought I wonder if the old guys were making tofu right now. And look, the lights are on. Crazy! But hey, just so you know, I'm not doing any work. Later, good luck with your tofu.
With that, James stumbled back out the door, leaving behind a stunned silence. After he was gone, the other employees surrounded me, their faces tight with frustration and concern. Takeshi, one of our most experienced craftsmen, stepped forward.
Mr. Anderson? Just a minute.
"What's wrong, everyone?" I asked, though I already knew what was coming.
That Parker kid. How long are you planning to keep him here?
Takeshi's voice was strained, his usual calm demeanor cracking. "Well, for a while, I suppose. Nothing specific yet," I replied, trying to sound non-committal.
Mr. Anderson, please.
Takeshi's voice cracked with emotion.
I can't take it anymore with that brat here. 20 years I've worked here, and I've never seen anyone treat our craft with such disrespect. Come on, Mr. Anderson. Do something.
The pain in Takeshi's voice hit me hard. This employee appealing to me is a veteran craftsman who's been here since before I joined. He taught me many of the finer points of tofu making when I first started, always with patience and respect. Now, seeing him nearly at his breaking point, I understand what he's saying. Not only is it tough for me to train James, but his selfish attitude and comments have devastated workplace morale. Just last week, he loudly proclaimed that monkeys could do this job better, while several of our most experienced craftsmen were within earshot. The dedicated employees are losing their motivation because of James. I've noticed a change. The usual cheerful morning greetings have become subdued, the pride in our work diminishing under the constant weight of James' derision. Really? Nothing good has come from James being here. I was caught between him and the hard-working employees, and my frustration was growing. Every morning I'd arrive at work with a knot in my stomach, wondering what new challenge James would present that day. Then after some more time passed, the incident occurred. It had been about a month since I started teaching James tofu making. The early morning air was crisp, and for once, James had arrived at a reasonable hour, 6 a.m. Though his mood seemed to vary. Sometimes Jay would participate in the work, and there were things he managed to learn. Though I initially had only negative impressions, for some reason that day I felt optimistic. Maybe it was the way he actually seemed to be paying attention during the morning briefing, or how he asked a semi-intelligent question about soybean selection. Somehow I wanted to trust him. "Alright, James," I said, gesturing to the soaking station. "You think you can handle this part on your own? It's a crucial step, but I think you're ready." He looked up from his phone, surprisingly alert.
Sure, no problem.
He replied with unusual confidence. "Great, I'm counting on you," I said, allowing myself to feel hopeful. "Don't hesitate to ask if anything's unclear." I moved to the other side of the production floor, helping Takeshi with a particularly delicate batch. About 30 minutes after assigning James that simple task, I heard something that made my blood run cold.
This looks bad.
I heard James' quiet mumble from not far away. When I nervously looked his way, there was James, standing there with a forced smile, having clearly failed at the task. The soybeans were ruined, over-soaked and beginning to ferment. The water temperature was completely wrong, and the timing was off by a crucial margin. We've had all sorts of people in the past, some who made repeated mistakes but eventually became excellent craftsmen. I remember my own early days, the gentle corrections from Mr. Tanaka, the gradual improvement that came with dedication and attention. But this failure, for such a simple task, I'd never seen anyone mess up this badly before. The entire batch would have to be discarded. Hundreds of dollars worth of premium soybeans wasted because he couldn't be bothered to follow basic instructions. Oh well, we'll have to start over from scratch. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm and constructive. "James, what happened? Was something unclear? Tell me why this happened." I tried to ask about the reason for the failure in a way that I showed I wasn't angry, keeping my voice level and professional. But James launched an incredible attack, his face turning red not with shame but with indignation.
Whatever,
James spat, throwing down the temperature gauge he'd been holding.
Besides, you never properly taught me this stuff anyway.
The clatter of the expensive equipment hitting the floor made everyone in the room wince. I felt my jaw tighten but maintained my composure. What? No, I taught you properly, and you just said you could do it. I gestured to the detailed instructions I'd written out for him, still sitting untouched on the nearby counter.
Huh? What's your problem, old man?
James' voice rose to a shout, echoing off the stainless steel equipment.
Why should I have to do this stuff anyway? I went to Harvard Economics. Do you understand how amazing I am? I didn't go to Harvard to become a tofu maker. This kind of work should be done by uneducated old men like you.
The room fell silent. Even the usual hum of machinery seemed muted. Takeshi had stopped mid-task, his hands frozen over his workstation. Other workers stood still, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and anger on their faces. He had been acting so confident earlier, but perhaps his pride was hurt by the failure. He hurled all sorts of insults at me, his face growing redder with each word. Seeing him throw a childish tantrum despite being a working adult, I couldn't help but get angry. Not just for myself, but for every dedicated worker in this room who'd given years of their life to perfecting this craft. James, that's enough! I said, my voice carrying an authority I rarely used. Our tofu making can never be accomplished by just one person. When I assigned you this task, I called it simple, but even simple tasks are crucial parts of the process. While mistakes happen, a failure of this scale means we have to start over from scratch. Do you understand how much extra work and materials that requires? Do you understand how this inconveniences everyone else? Work is about cooperating with others and... Before I could finish, James' face contorted with rage. He kicked over a nearby bucket of soaking soybeans, sending water cascading across the floor.
The guy who just makes tofu has no business lecturing someone with a Harvard degree. Screw you!
That parting shot, he stormed out, leaving behind a mess both literal and figurative. The sound of his expensive shoes splashing through the spilled water echoed through the silent room. Several days passed and James stopped coming to work. The atmosphere in the production facility gradually improved. People started smiling again. The usual friendly banter returned. Well, given how things went, I guess it can't be helped. I thought to myself one morning while checking the day's soybeans delivery. Just as I was settling into the new normal, I got called in by Director Parker. It must be about his son. The summons had come via email, marked urgent in angry red letters. I haven't done anything wrong, I reminded myself. If things had continued as they were, the employees might have gone on strike. That's how bad James' behavior was. I straightened my collar and steeled myself for the confrontation. The walk to headquarters felt longer than usual, each step bringing me closer to what I knew would be an unpleasant meeting. The morning sun cast long shadows across the company courtyard as I made my way to the executive floor. I knocked on the door of the designated conference room, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. Taking one final breath, I turned the handle. "Excuse me, Anderson here," I said, stepping into the room's cold fluorescent lighting. The conference room was unnecessarily large for just 3 people, making the atmosphere even more intimidating. Director Parker sat at the head of the long table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his expression already set in a scowl.
"So you're here,"
he said, not bothering to look up from the papers in front of him. There was Director Parker and his son James, slouching in a chair next to him playing with his phone. Still as insolent as ever, he didn't even acknowledge my presence. The sound of his game's background music provided an absurd soundtrack to the tense situation.
Well, thanks for coming all the way from your smelly tofu shop."
Director Parker finally looked up, his lips curling into a sneer.
"I hear you've been humiliating my son."
As expected. I'd anticipated this, but it's still unpleasant. The familiar knot formed in my stomach, the same one I used to get during those food poisoning incident visits years ago.
"Mr. Anderson."
Director Parker stood up, straightening his designer tie.
"You're just an old man near retirement, aren't you? What's with this impossible training regimen you're putting my precious son through? And then lecturing him when he makes mistakes. Are you trying to crush young talent? You act high and mighty like some master craftsman, but you're just a low-level tofu maker."
I could see where James got his attitude from. The resemblance between father and son was striking, not just in their features, but in their shared contempt for those they considered beneath them. I planned to mostly stay quiet to avoid trouble, but the accusations were completely one-sided, and entirely false. Every word he spoke twisted the knife deeper, making a mockery of everything we stood for in production. I couldn't stay silent anymore, and opened my mouth to let them know the truth about James's terrible work habits. The words came out steady and clear despite my racing heart. "Mr. Parker, with all due respect, your son's work ethic is completely unacceptable. He shows up hours late, comes to work after drinking. It's unprecedented. Even with his Harvard degree, no one will follow someone with such poor work habits."
"Silence!"
Before I could finish, the director suddenly shouted, his voice bouncing off the conference room walls. His face had turned an alarming shade of red, and a vein pulsed on his forehead.
Anderson, you... How dare you talk back? Do you know whose son you were put in charge of? You incompetent old fool can't even teach basic tasks properly. You're fired! Fired!
The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. My mind raced through the implications. My family, my responsibility to the production team, the years I'd given to this company. Wait, fired? I managed to keep my voice steady despite my shock. Mr. Parker, you're not even my direct supervisor. Do you have that authority? I couldn't help but ask him directly out of disbelief. The organizational chart clearly showed that production staff reported through a different chain of command.
Shut up!
James suddenly jumped up from his chair, his phone clattering to the table.
When my dad says so, a low-level old man like you gets fired. Well, you were close to retirement anyway, so what's the difference? Heh.
That's right, that's right.
Director Parker chimed in, a cruel smile spreading across his face.
Your punishment will come down soon, but get ready. Huh.
As I stood there dumbfounded while the Parker father and son laughed triumphantly, their voices mixing in an ugly chorus of superiority, suddenly the conference room door opened with a soft click. Excuse me, Director Parker? We can hear you out in the hallway. A woman's voice, calm but carrying an unmistakable authority, cut through their laughter like a knife. Looking toward the door, there stood a familiar figure in a crisp business suit. The Parker duo fell silent immediately. Looking their way, they were completely frozen, their faces draining of color so quickly it would have been comical under different circumstances.
Miss, why are you here?
Director Parker stammered, his previous bravado evaporating instantly. The woman who opened the door was the CEO's daughter. She walked into the room with measured steps, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Each click seemed to make the Parkers flinch. Why? Because I could hear the shouting from outside, she said, raising an eyebrow. You seem to be severely reprimanding this employee. Don't you think you're going too far?
No, nothing like that.
Director Parker's voice had risen several octaves. He was flustered, trying to somehow smooth over the situation. The CEO's daughter stepped fully into the conference room and walked towards us. She stopped in front of James, who seemed to be trying to shrink into his expensive suit. So, you're James Parker. I've heard a lot about your work attitude. A Harvard graduate can't make tofu? James was sweating nervously, opening and closing his mouth without words, unable to look away from the CEO's daughter's intense presence. He looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air.
Miss, if I may.
Director Parker jumped in, attempting to salvage the situation. His words came out in a rush.
Yes, my son graduated from Harvard studying economics. When he joined, he wanted to work at headquarters. My son is a high achiever who wouldn't embarrass us anywhere, making him start basic tofu making at this company. Isn't that rather nonsensical? This is for the company's benefit, too.
As the director spoke, he started smirking, apparently thinking he gained the upper hand. The same smirk I'd seen countless times when he cornered his subordinates. However, ignoring the director completely, the CEO's daughter walked over and stopped beside me. Then, in a move that made both Parker's jaws drop, she casually placed her elbow on my shoulder. A gesture of such familiar affection that it clearly confused them. Then she delivered one line to the director, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. Oh, really? But having new employees experience production is the incoming CEO's policy, isn't it? Right, Dad? The color drained from Director Parker's face so quickly I thought he might faint.
Dad! Surely you jest!
He sputtered, his hands gripping the conference table for support. Indeed, Sarah. As expected of my daughter. You understand her management philosophy well. My voice carried a warmth I'd been holding back until now.
What? Dad, what's going on here?
James had finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. His eyes darted between Sarah and me, trying to make sense of what was happening.
So, if she's really your daughter, and if you're really her father, then...
Director Parker's voice trailed off as the implication started to sink in. Sarah smiled, the same smile she inherited from her mother. That's right. I've been saying it all along. This man is my father. My mother is the CEO. The silence that followed was deafening. James had slumped back into his chair, his phone forgotten on the table. Director Parker's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. As Sarah said, my wife is the CEO, and I married into the family. The story of how I met my wife is actually quite interesting. We crossed paths during that food poisoning incident years ago, when she was still a department head. That's a tale for another time. Sarah's great-grandfather founded this tofu shop, and it's been passed down through generation, now in my wife's generation. Which started as a humble neighborhood shop has grown into a franchise brand that most people would recognize. The commitment to quality and tradition that Sarah's great-grandfather instilled remains at the core of our success. Well, I continued, straightening my posture, when I joined as a mid-career hire 10 years ago, my wife offered me the CEO position. But if I was going to be CEO, I wanted to learn the production process thoroughly first. That's why I declined until now. That's why I've been making tofu starting at 1 a.m. And though it's not public yet, it's already been decided that I'll become CEO next year. The Parker father and son was sweating profusely, their mouths hanging open in shock. James' phone slipped from his nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. Neither of them moved to pick it up.
But why?
James finally managed to stammer.
Why would a CEO work in production?
I smiled, thinking back to my days at the major food manufacturer. Let me tell you a story about why I've been so insistent on understanding production. It's something I learned the hard way in my previous job. I leaned against the conference table, memories of those difficult days washing over me. Back then, I worked in sales at the major food manufacturer. I was quite successful too, always hitting my targets, bringing in new clients. I thought I knew everything about our products because I could quote specifications and pricing from memory. Sarah moved to stand by the window, her expression softening as she heard this story she knew too well. Even the Parkers seemed drawn in despite themselves. Then came the incident that changed everything. There was a major food poisoning outbreak caused by one of our products. It was widely reported, and even now if you search online, you can easily find details about the situation from that time. I could still see the newspaper headlines in my head, still feel the weight of responsibility crushing down on me. As a salesperson, I personally visited and apologized to affected customers. The damage was extensive, and the apologies continued for several months. My voice grew quiet as I recalled one particular visit. I remember standing in the hospital room, bowing deeply to a family whose child had been hospitalized. We deeply apologize for this incident, I said, the words feeling hollow even as I spoke them. The father's response still echoes in my memory. So you finally shown up. Do you think a simple apology is enough? Since you came all the way here, you should be groveling. Get down on your knees. I'm terribly sorry, I had said, dropping to my knees on the cold hospital floor. So, can you explain how this incident happened? The father had demanded. Well, that's... I had stumbled over my words, realizing I had no real answer. Don't tell me you can't explain what happened with your own company's product. And you still had the nerve to come here? No, that's not... Honestly, this is why young corporate types are useless. Forget it. Someone like you is pointless. If you're going to apologize, bring someone who knows what they're talking about. Yes, bring the CEO. Bring the CEO here. Looking at James and his father now, I could see my words were having an impact. The smirk had completely vanished from James's face. Why did this incident happen? I couldn't answer this simple question, I continued. I couldn't explain about our own products. Yet there I was, mindlessly going around apologizing. How pathetic. Working sales, you need to know your products. I thought I knew them, but I didn't understand anything. I stood up straight, my voice growing stronger. My answer was understand production. If you understand production, you know how your products are manufactured and shipped. Only then can you truly know your products and do sales properly. Even if there's a problem, you can provide explanations that satisfy customers. No business can succeed while disregarding production. I continued, my voice firm. The conference room had grown still, even the usual hum of the building's air conditioning seeming distant. Even if you push forward while ignoring production, it will definitely catch up with you someday, just like it did with me during that food poisoning incident. I turned to face James directly. That's why any business requires understanding of production, whether you're a Harvard graduate or whatever. Academic credentials alone will never lead to success. Go ahead, try starting your own company for ideas of automation and efficiency. No one will follow you. Sarah stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. Really? You underestimate our company, and our incoming CEO too. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at Director Parker. You were going to fire him, weren't you, Director Parker? The director's face had gone pale.
No, not at all. Nothing of the sort.
He waved his hands frantically, as if trying to erase his earlier words from existence.
Dad, what are you cowering for? This is embarrassing.
James burst out, but his voice lacked its usual confidence.
James!
His father's sharp tone made him jump.
Show some respect to the CEO's daughter and the incoming CEO. Be quiet!
Then, turning back to us with a forced smile,
We deeply apologize. We'll be taking our leave.
James seemed unsatisfied until the end. His face twisted in a scowl. The director forcefully pulled him along as they hurriedly left the conference room. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Sarah and me alone. "Well, that was entertaining," Sarah said, smoothing her suit jacket. "Now I must say, Dad, you showed remarkable restraint all these months." I smiled, thinking of all the mornings I gritted my teeth while training James. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people reveal their true nature. A few days later, the truth came crashing down on the Parker family like a house of cards. It came to light that Director Parker had been using forceful methods to inflate his numbers and severely harassing his subordinates. An internal audit revealed falsified reports, coerced contracts, and a pattern of workplace bullying that had gone unreported due to a fear of retaliation. He was promptly demoted to regular employee. His corner office exchanged for a cubicle on the general sales floor. The transformation was dramatic. Gone were the designer suits and commanding presence, replaced by a subdued figure who seemed to shrink into himself. "Oh, look! There goes the former Director Parker!" I would hear whispers in the hallway. "Where did all the arrogance go? Oh my, we should make way for him!" Followed by barely suppressed giggles. After his demotion, Director Parker faced daily mockery from his former subordinates, and with his reputation in tatters, he resigned voluntarily within a month. His resignation letter, I heard, was brief and devoid of the grandiose language he had once been known for. As for his son James, he stopped coming to work after that confrontation and eventually quit without even submitting a formal resignation. The production team celebrated for a small part of that day we received his resignation notice. I pretended not to notice the sake they snuck in after hours. From what I heard through industry contacts, after quitting he started his own company as a competitor in the same industry. Someone mentioned seeing him at a business convention, boasting about how he would revolutionize the tofu industry with his Harvard economics knowledge. Perhaps he thought he would overtake our company and eventually acquire it. A revenge fantasy born from wounded pride. He apparently made massive initial investments focusing on the automation and efficiency he used to talk about so much. I remember seeing the glossy promotional materials his company put out. Robots making tofu, fully automated production lines, not a human craftsman in sight. The images seemed cold, sterile, everything our company stood against. However, just as I predicted, sales didn't meet expectations. Customers complained about inconsistent quality, about tofu that lacked the subtle flavors that came from careful human attention. He couldn't recover his equipment investments, and now he's drowning in debt. Last I heard, his company was on the verge of bankruptcy. As for me, time passed and I finally took the CEO position. The ceremony was small, just as I wanted it. My wife handed over the company's seal with tears in her eyes, proud of how far we'd come together. Though I'll be leaving daily production work, the experience I gained over these 10 years is invaluable and something I must never forget as CEO. Every morning I still arrive early enough to walk through the production floor, greeting the craftsman by name, checking the day's first batch of tofu. My management policy remains unchanged. New employees must experience production. They all have to make tofu, no exceptions. Some grumble at first, just as I did, but most come to understand the value of knowing our product from the ground up. While I generally leave training to the production staff now, I occasionally visit to give hands-on instruction to new employees. Just last week, I spent an hour with a fresh graduate, showing her the proper way to test soybean consistency. "If you do this, and this, it works well. Try it," I demonstrated, guiding her hands through the soaking soybeans. Her eyes lit up with understanding. "Yes, like this, and this. Wow, it worked!" She looked up at me in surprise. "You're the CEO, but you can still do production work? Thank you." That's amazing. That's why I'm the CEO. I couldn't help but laugh, remembering my own early days. Today's young people, if you explain things properly without scolding them, are all receptive like this. James might have been a rare exception, a cautionary tale of what happens when pride comes before learning. Every time I work with new employees now, I'm reminded of the contrast. Blessed with wonderful employees, our company is growing rapidly. The production floor buzzes with energy each morning. A harmonious blend of traditional craftsmanship and carefully considered modern improvements. We maintain our commitment to quality while finding ways to support our craftsmen with tools that enhance their work, rather than replace it. We're planning to expand overseas soon, but I couldn't be happier. Last month, I visited potential locations in Southeast Asia, where the demand for authentic Japanese tofu had been growing. watching local workers learn our techniques, their faces lighting up with the same joy of creation I felt a decade ago. I knew we were on the right path. And there's another joy I found since becoming CEO, one that makes all those early morning hours worth it. I can finally spend time with my grandchildren, something my daughter kept nagging me about. Just yesterday, I sat in our family room. My 5-year-old grandson on my knees, I told him stories about making tofu. His eyes grew wide as I described the magical transformation of soybeans to the silky white blocks he loved to eat.
Grandpa, can I make tofu too?
He asked, bouncing with excitement. Of course you can, I laughed, ruffling his hair. When you're older, I'll teach you everything I know. While I felt some sadness leaving production work, time with grandchildren is also limited. My wife reminds me of this often, usually while watching our grandkids play in the garden. They grow up so fast, she'll say, squeezing my hand. We need to treasure every moment. I can trust the production team, and there's nothing to worry about. The craftsmanship I helped nurture will continue to grow and evolve in capable hands. Takeshi, who once despaired over James's attitude, now leads our training program with the same patience and wisdom Mr. Tanaka showed me years ago. I've decided to spend the rest of my life enjoying quality time with my family without reservations. Early morning drives to work have been replaced by breakfasts with my grandchildren, watching their faces light up as they try new types of tofu or bring home from the factory. Any job, any position, if you don't understand production, things will eventually fall apart, because it's the production workers who keep a company running. This truth has guided me throughout my career, from those painful days of apologies to my current role as CEO. Whether you're a CEO or entry level, in this world, no person and no job deserves to be looked down upon. Each role, each person contributes to the greater whole, just like each step in making tofu is essential to the final product. Though I'm CEO now, I won't be complacent. Every morning I still taste the day's first batch of tofu, sharing feedback with our craftsmen. I want to continue valuing both production and people, creating a company where everyone can work comfortably, where tradition and innovation coexist in harmony. And sometimes, when I pass the empty conference room where the confrontation with the Parkers took place, I smile, remembering how a simple tofu maker taught a Harvard graduate one of life's most valuable lessons. That true success comes not from titles or degrees, but from understanding and respecting the foundations that support us all.